Hi, my name is Kim Daniels, and I'm with Georgetown University's Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life. We're so glad to be hosting this conversation tonight on Latinos, young people, and the 2020 election. What happened, why, and what now? This discussion is part of our Latino Leaders series of gatherings for young Latino Catholics, as well as our Salt and Light gatherings for young Catholics, to help explore the links between faith, Catholic social thought, and personal and professional life. We're so grateful to have so many young people from around the country joining us here tonight. A month after the election, tonight we're taking a deeper dive into the impact Latino voters and young voters had on the results by listening to young and Latino leaders themselves. We'll discuss how Latino voters and young voters of faith helped shape the outcome of the 2020 US presidential election and what that means for public life going forward. We saw that in the context of a divisive campaign shadowed by a global pandemic, an economic crisis, calls for racial justice, and ongoing division over abortion and other social issues, both campaigns heightened their outreach to Latino voters and to young voters. Of course, neither of these groups is monolithic. And for both groups, faith commitments or the lack of such commitments can help us understand how their members approach public life. By looking at turnout, election results, and the experiences of members of these communities, we can hopefully gain insight into what lessons both parties should draw for the future and what lessons the new administration and the new Congress might draw as they seek to shape policies in the coming years and engage young and Latino voters. Here at the Initiative, we're so glad to be providing this forum and bringing together these young leaders to explore questions concerning Trump's relative success with Latino voters and how that should affect the Biden administration going forward, how issues of faith affected young and Latino voters, and how young people, emerging leaders, and faith communities can help bring the country together, strengthen democracy, and advance the common good. So joining us for our discussion tonight are Sarah Pulliam Bailey, a religion reporter for the Washington Post who covers how faith intersects with politics and culture. Sarah is a former national correspondent for Religion News Service and online editor of Christianity Today. Tim Carney, who is the commentary editor at the Washington Examiner, a visiting fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and the author of Alienated America, Why Some Places Thrive While Others Collapse. Jeanné Lewis, a board member at Faith and Public Life, a member of St. Augustine Catholic Church in Washington, D.C., a facilitator of interfaith dialogue and racial healing, and a former candidate for Washington, D.C. City Council. And Alejandra Molina, a national reporter covering Latinos and religion on the West Coast for Religion News Service, and a former reporter for Southern California News Group, where she covered cities, immigration, race, and religion. We'll have an opportunity for questions and answers later on, so please send any questions you have to the email you see at the bottom of your screen. And please also share your thoughts on social media using the hashtag Latino and Young Voters and by tagging the initiative at GUCST Public Life on Twitter. And so with that, let's get started. Alejandra, the Latino vote has been one of the major stories of this election. You're a national reporter for Religion News Service covering Latinos and religion, and you've written both about the importance of Trump's pro-life policies for Latino Catholics and about Latino voters in Arizona for whom issues of immigrant rights, COVID-19 relief, and jobs were central to their votes for President-elect Biden. Why did Latino voters break the way they did? And is it even helpful to think of Latino voters as a unified group? And if you could, help us think about how the Trump and Biden campaigns reached out to this set of voters and what worked and didn't work in that outreach.
Yeah, so I think many people are realizing that we can't see Latinos as a monolith, or just as one voting bloc. I grew up here in the LA area and in Southern California. The Mexican American community is super different from Central Americans, from Guatemalans, from Salvadorans here. So our Latinos here are different from Texas Latinos or Florida Latinos. And so when I reported about the Latino vote in Arizona, I wanted to understand if or what role faith played in that area. And so Arizona, there's a big Mexican community and a big Catholic community. So to understand the role that faith played among Latino voters there, I interviewed activists and organizers to see if faith at all was brought up when they approached voters and when they were doing their work and registering voters. And so, what I learned and what was apparent is that Latinos in Arizona have experienced a lot of anti-immigrant laws and policing. And so for the past 10 years, it was really the grassroots organizers that mobilized voters there by registering Latinos to vote. And so when talking to voters and educating the community, I was actually surprised to learn that their faith did come up a lot. And so abortion is important to many Latino Catholic voters. And so, I remember speaking to this woman, her name is Petra Falcone, and she founded an organization there 10 years ago. It's called Promise Arizona. And her organization has been registering Latino voters for the past decade. And so she said that when voting, many Latino Catholic voters in Arizona, yes, immigration is definitely important, but so is COVID, and so is our jobs among those who are working class. And so when they're voting, they really consider all these issues, not just abortion. And when it comes to abortion, many didn't think that Trump was really that pro-life, given how he spoke about immigrants. And, one quote that really stood out to me was that she said, "To us, life is much more broader. It's not just about abortion. It's about, taking care of the community, making sure immigrants have a quality of life." And so they really weighed all those issues when they voted in Arizona. And, in Florida, for example, we've reported how Trump really made his presence known in that area. So he launched his Evangelicals for Trump initiative in a Spanish-speaking evangelical church there. And, my colleague Jack Jenkins has really reported on how some Latinos still connect mass deportations with Obama and Biden as opposed to, with Trump. And, his opposition to abortion and support for religious liberty is really important for religious Latinos there. So that, the voters in Arizona, Mexican American, Catholic, are not that every Latino there is Catholic, but those voters are very different from the voters in Florida.
Thanks so much for that, Alejandra. And now, Sarah, why don't I turn to you to help us think about young voters and voters of faith? You have been a religion reporter at the Washington Post who focuses on the intersection of faith and culture. You've also covered this beat for Religion News Service and for Christianity Today. Help us think about, after a month of digesting the election, what was your main takeaway about faith in the election? And what role do you think the issues that Alejandra mentioned, like abortion and immigration, played in young voters' decisions about how to cast their ballots? And what about, in particular, she also mentioned evangelical Latinos. What do you think their vote, what was their impact in this election as well?
Yeah, so I think it'll take us even more months to really digest and really do some good analysis. And part of the problem this year with journalism in general is we haven't been able to do as much travel as we normally would be. And so to that end, I feel like I would love to be in Florida or in, these states in Texas where, this election played out in such interesting ways, but we weren't able to get to some of these communities. So to that end, I feel like we are still trying to wrestle with, why did the chips fall where they did? I spoke with a professor named Ryan Burge, who does a lot of analysis on polling and especially how Trump's approval ratings were ahead of the election. And one of the things I thought was really interesting was in the demographic category of ages 36 to 44, which isn't quite young. We're not talking Gen Z. We're talking more older millennial, younger, the Gen X. So this category, these will be people who probably have kids who have, are a little bit more established in their careers, but they're not ready for retirement, right? That category across religious categories, whether it was Hispanic evangelicals or Hispanic Catholics, Trump saw a pretty good favorable rating among that category. And I thought that was really interesting. And we talked about reasons why, and I feel like we need to do more reporting and analysis, but maybe it was like COVID shutting down, aspects of the economy. I think we have yet to figure out all the lasting impacts of, what COVID and what some of the shutdowns have done. But, maybe it was like schools shutting down, and maybe they liked that Trump wanted to reopen them and he was so gung-ho about reopening the economy. So maybe that was why. So to me, it's unclear how much, religious motivation was part of that, or whether it was just like the circumstances of this year. But I do think, that was sort of a consistent takeaway, was this category, this sort of younger, maybe parenting age group was, a little bit more favorable to Trump than even their, parents' generation.
And let's bring you into this conversation now. You're the commentary editor at the Washington Examiner, a fellow at AEI. You followed this closely and you've written about the election quite a bit. You've also, by the way, I should mention, written a terrific book called Alienated America. And it's about the erosion of civil society institutions and the resulting loss of cohesion and community and how that's affected our politics and our cultural life. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that or sort of draw from that as you answer. But I'd love to ask you what issues you see as key drivers of the election results, and in particular, key to securing the votes of young people and Latino voters, and what explains Trump's great gains among Latino voters in your mind?
Yes, thank you. And just to reinforce one thing that Alejandra said, I was thinking that when I'm writing about, former coal miners in Western Pennsylvania or the sons of steel workers, and then when I go to Chevy Chase, Maryland, the wealthiest municipality in the DC area, that if I were to call these all white voters and talk about the white vote, we'd all laugh at lumping them together. It's easier for us to do with a minority group, and this election hopefully will end that. There's been great coverage about the distinctions, Mexican Americans, Central Americans, Cubans, Tejanos in the Rio Grande Valley. But when I was in Western PA, there was this one line in a Trump rally that I went to that just sort of made me wince. He just said, "The United States will never be a socialist country." And I thought this was sort of warmed over zombie Reaganism. I was like, are we still fighting the Cold War? I loved fighting the Cold War. Red Dawn and Top Gun, those were great movies, right? But what did this have to do? And then it was explained to me that this was directed at people who were from, or parents were from, South American, Central American countries that have been ravished by socialism. And that the sort of democratic counter argument of, oh, well, no, we're talking about kind of Norway type socialism can sound like, oh, no, we'll give you white person socialism, which works better. This was not a winning message. So that, I think, was part of it. The Cuban turnout, the Cuban percentage went up. Also, just material benefit. Hispanic unemployment was below 4% at one point before the pandemic hit. That's absolutely incredible. Wages had grown immensely, and people gave Donald Trump credit for it. And across races, you saw the wage increases were greater in the lower income quintiles. So he actually did, I don't want to say he delivered, I don't think the president controls the economy, but the Trump era economy actually did deliver more wage growth to the working class than they had seen before. And this especially hit non-white workers, particularly Hispanic workers. And, you look in places like the Rio Grande Valley where Trump outperformed, you see the employers, oil and gas, the Border Patrol. These are employers of lots of Hispanics, so we can look at that. Another thing I hope we'll get into later, though, has to do with sort of the idea that Donald Trump is a racist, that this is something that is absolutely obviously true to a huge portion of the electorate, but not either not true or not a big deal, obviously, to the record number of non-white voters who voted Republican this time around, including, according to exit polls, 32% of U.S. Hispanics or Latinos. Big caveat, we don't know if the exit polls are reliable or way off for all sorts of reasons. But I think that our understanding of racism and racial insensitivity needs a recalibration, considering what we're finding from non-white voters around the country.
Thanks for that, Tim. And now let's go to you, Jeanné. You're a board member at Faith and Public Life. You're a leader at St. Augustine. You're a longtime friend of the initiative. You've also walked the walk. You put your beliefs into action by running for DC City Council, which I'm just so grateful for and impressed with. I want you to, if you could, before we get into the topic tonight in particular, could you tell us a little bit about what led you to that decision to run for office and what it's like to run for local office in this divisive election cycle, and then maybe shift and help us think about how young people's faith commitments affected the way they voted in the election, the faith commitments of people of color, both in your particular race in DC, but also more broadly.
Absolutely. So I actually decided to run for office years ago. I couldn't have predicted COVID-19, couldn't have predicted, anything that happened this year, except for the fact that we'd have a presidential election. And I ultimately decided to run locally because of my very hyper-local experience. I am from the DC area. I went away to college and lived away 12 years, and DC was unrecognizable to me when I came home in 2010. And there was a lot of growth in the city, but it was pushing people out. And what I quickly realized was that our local politics was making a decision for short-term growth and for a temporary town, as opposed to thinking about this as our home and thinking about this as my home. And so ultimately our campaign slogan was our home, our vision, our time. And I think that is an accurate reflection of why I decided to run, and also what was motivating a lot of people even before COVID-19, and particularly for young people, because we've known for a long time that young people are values driven, and our older institutions are not enough. Their longevity or their existence is not enough to justify involvement. And so younger voters and younger people and younger leaders want to know, what is the impact that we're going to make? Why are we doing this? Why is this relevant? And I think that our slogan, our home, our vision, our time, and also really thinking about how to make long-term decisions that preserve a place of home and security in a rapidly growing and rapidly changing city really resonated with people, especially young people. I also want to emphasize the piece about vision, because I heard a lot of folks talking about problems, again, even before COVID-19. And it was about, how can we solve this problem? Is my problem more important than your problem? It wasn't looking at a holistic lifestyle, an intersectional human being, and the complicated layers of our problem, similar to what Alejandra was referencing with voters across the country. And so our campaign talked a lot about vision, and that resonated with young people as well. The majority of staff that I had on my campaign are young people. I had undergraduate students, recent graduates, people in their 20s and early 30s. So it was really exciting. In terms of what we saw with younger voters and faith, I definitely believe that the values of younger voters, whether they identify as spiritual or non-religious, but spiritual or religious, motivated young people to get involved in this election. And so with COVID-19, and then with the racial conflict and racial uprisings that we saw in the country, and then the contentiousness of the presidential election, I saw young people breaking the rules. And I think that young people were uniquely positioned when COVID-19 hit, because we were already online, we were already texting, and everyone else was trying to pivot and figure out how to fit in there. But young people said, let me engage in the space that I'm already comfortable with and just do something new, because the time is too urgent, the needs are too urgent, and we need to figure it out.
Great. And I think that was really true when COVID-19 came about. You really did see the need to shift online. And obviously some people were better able to do that and more quickly than others. I'd love to open it up to you all now. And maybe Alejandra, I'll start with you. What do you think? So I'd love your reactions to anything you've heard so far, but also to help us think about what different Latino communities, different groups of young voters might be hoping for from the new administration. And do you think the Biden administration is going to shift in any way on its policies because of the way the vote turned out with these groups?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I feel like what happened in Florida will really kind of galvanize Democrats to do more and reach out to the faith and Latino communities in that area. I mean, you saw the comments that former President Barack Obama made recently when talking about Latinos and who are evangelical. I think he said something along the lines of, Latino evangelicals care more about abortion or other issues more than undocumented workers and immigration. So that really turned off a lot of, Latinos in the faith. And I feel like maybe they need to understand more the theology behind Latino evangelicals, the leadership of the churches. I mean, I think in evangelical Latino churches, a lot of their leaders, a lot of the pastors have really endorsed Trump. And so the followers of those churches get these messages. And of course, they're going to, listen to their pastor or their leadership there. And so I think Democrats maybe need to learn more about the faith, the communities there, the issues that are important to them. And so yeah, on that end, yes. And then I do feel that in terms of Latino Catholics, I've seen more not more, but I've seen certain bishops, certain dioceses be more open to letting their parishioners know that it's okay to not just vote on abortion. It's okay if we're not just, I guess they kind of urge their flocks not to just be single issue voters, to also consider immigration, to also consider the death penalty. So I have seen some bishops in certain regions, like border regions, be more, I guess, open and discussing, to younger Latino Catholic voters, like, I guess the nuances when it comes to abortion and other issues that are important to them.
Sarah, what's your reaction to that? And in particular, Alejandra suggests that the party should really pay more attention to issues of faith. Do you see a shift resulting from this election about that? Do you think there'll be more attention to issues of faith, that drove voting turnout for young people, for Latinos, for other groups? What's your thought?
Yeah, so I guess I have two thoughts. One is, and I would be curious if Alejandra resonates with this. So I feel like the Democratic Party in, say, the 12 years I've been covering faith and politics has just become even more and more pro-choice. Like, it's very, very hard for someone who's anti-abortion to be in the Democratic Party. We've seen it time and time again where they get voted out, or they don't get funding, or they just get pushed out of the party. And so to that end, how do they, attract these Latino voters if they're seen as there is no room in this party to, be anti-abortion. And then secondly, I talked to a professor who, one of his theories, and I would need more data or anecdotes or some more reporting, I think, to back this up. But his thought was that perhaps, a lot of Latino evangelicals are trying to convert Latino Catholics into Latino evangelicalism, and therein sort of shepherding them into a more conservative political, cultural force. And so Alejandra, you're nodding your head. Does this resonate with your reporting?
Yeah, I have a story out today that kind of touches on that. But there is data that shows that Latino Protestants, including evangelicals, Pentecostals, are more conservative, are more supportive of Trump, are more Republican than Latino Catholics. And so I know that I don't know how far they go in converting Catholics into their faith, but I do know that there's a difference in their ethnic identity once they convert from Catholicism. So and I do see that more Latino Catholics are leaving the faith. There's more Latinos who are religiously unaffiliated, but also, Latino Catholics, I believe, no longer make up the majority in Catholicism here in the US.
Thanks for that. Tim, I'd love your reaction to that line of thought as well. But I also want to sort of step back and hear a little bit more about what you spoke about earlier. And the question I'd have is why we focus on Trump voters among young and Latino voters when they both voted overwhelmingly for Biden. And we have a questioner writing in about this as well. So in other words, Republicans clearly have a big problem with these groups. Yep. What do they need to do to attract more of these voters? And also, what does the Democratic Party need to do to build on its majorities with these voters? And
specifically, Joe Biden overwhelmingly won among Hispanic, Latino Catholics. There's survey data from before the election suggesting that that Trump might have actually won the evangelical Hispanic vote. Again, we don't have good enough data on that, but among the Catholics, Catholic Latinos, Biden won, with the more than 2-to-1 margin. And so why? If white people who go to church, white Catholics who are in the pews every week or almost every week tend to be Republicans, shouldn't Hispanic Catholics be the same way? I think there's lots of reasons that doesn't happen, and a big part is just the sort of the presentation, the fact that the party has had sort of two different faces on the question of immigration. One is the Trump face and former Congressman Steve King, and that the people who are coming here from Mexico are disproportionately rapists, et cetera. The other, though, when Republicans are more open to immigration, it tends to sort of be a chamber of commerce line. They're saying, well, what we need is more guest workers, which is not really immigration, right? That's not bringing in people to be Americans. That's temporarily using the labor of somebody who happens to reside in another country. So that the Republicans' only two policy platforms on immigration has been the Chamber of Commerce, how can we get cheap labor, and Trumpism, never adopting a sort of, hey, I shouldn't say never. In the Reagan era, it was more common to adopt the line of, there are lots of people out there who want to be Americans, right? John McCain talked this way a little bit, but it was all too airy, right? It was, if you believe in the Declaration of Independence, you're an American. No, a lot of these people, if you want to come here and live and be part of a community and settle down, you get to be an American. That kind of message on immigration has never been tried. I'm not saying that immigration is a top issue. I'm saying that the Republican messaging on immigration has turned away people who should be Republicans. And there is an opportunity because of the things Sarah was talking about there. The Democrats have basically become intolerant of pro-life voters. There's all the worries about religious liberty. Anybody who goes to church ought to worry about what not necessarily a Biden, but a Kamala Harris administration would do on the score of religious liberty. So there's an opening there, but people aren't going to come through the door if they think you hate them. And Republicans have generally given off the vibe of either disinterest or hatred. And generally, stop acting like you hate people is a good first step to getting them in the door.
Jeanné, what's your reaction to all of this? And in particular, what the parties can do to build on their support from both of these groups. And in particular, when I hear Tim talk, I'm reminded that Catholics generally don't have a comfortable home in either political party. I wonder how that affects how young Catholics sort of find a home in either place, how they look to those parties. And in fact, do they look to political parties as a place to engage in major issues, supporting the common good, finding their meaning?
Yeah, so I ran as an independent for the DC Council, and our city, our charter is structured in a unique way where we have to have 2 non-Democrats on the council at any given time. So there were between 24 and 26 people in my race at any given moment. It fluctuated. But what was interesting is that there are, on paper, DC is overwhelmingly blue. I think it's like 78% registered Democrats. But as I talked to individuals, especially a lot of young people, they said, I'm kind of independent too. Like, I'm registered as a Democrat because you're going to have to be in DC in order to have influence, but I'm kind of an independent too. And that doesn't necessarily mean I'm moderate. I ran generally as a progressive independent, certainly on social issues. I was a little more innovative on fiscal issues, but there were a lot of people who identify as independents, and that means a lot of different things to different people. But particularly for young people, what I found during this election, both at the local and national level, is can you get to people directly? So I 100% agree with what Alejandra and Sarah were saying, that, the pastor or leaders have influence, but I think younger people, because of our facility with accessing information in a variety of venues, we look to find information for ourselves. So people reached out to me as a candidate on Instagram. People would DM me on Twitter and expect a response, like a professional response from me as a candidate. And if I did not respond to their DM, then I was ignoring them, and then I didn't actually, care, and I wasn't actually interested. And I was happy to do that, but I could see how other candidates who don't have facility with those different platforms might think, well, this isn't how you officially contact someone. You're not really serious about what you're asking. But for young people, that was a legitimate way to get in contact with a candidate and discuss very, very serious issues. So to the extent that you could text someone directly, call someone directly, DM someone directly, I think that you're able to have a more robust conversation. I also want to say that I saw young people in DC and nationally really pushing the envelope around race, and really pushing the envelope, pushing like a hyper progressive agenda. I mean, it was young people who essentially catalyzed and led all of the racially related uprisings that we saw. And so people saw this moment of crisis, younger people, not as a time to be more conservative with our resources, but to spend it all, like whether that's social capital, political capital, fiscal capital, spend it all so that we can take care of each other and do what we need to do. And I really appreciated the data you shared, Sarah, about that age range that's slightly higher, because I think it makes complete logical sense if you have children, if you have a mortgage. But for younger people, this was the time to just lay it all on the table. And I think that's why some of the more progressive policies in the Biden campaign, even though they weren't that progressive on the scale of progressivism, I think, they were certainly more progressive than Trump. They directly confronted racism. And I think that appeals to a lot of younger voters.
Let's use that as a jumping off point now going forward, because you raised a lot there, Jeanné. The first is one, and I'd love for any of you to jump in on any of this, and maybe Alejandra, I'll start with you if that's okay, and anybody else jump in too. First of all, issues of technology and how you reach out to people, I know is very important, and we've seen some evidence of that, I know, with Latino voters in particular, when you have sophisticated outreach through particular kinds of technology. Also, I don't know how we can talk about the election without talking about protests around racial injustice and without talking about COVID-19. And Sarah and Tim, Alejandra, I'd love your thoughts on how those big issues that were with us for months affected the votes with these groups. Alejandra, can we start with you?
Yeah, so when the protests happened surrounding Black Lives Matter, a lot of us at RNS went to our local protests just to see what kind of faith angles we found, what kind of religious leaders were out there. And we did see, at least here in the Southern California area, there were big interfaith groups that made their presence known in these movements. But they followed, it's not like they took initiative, but they followed the way of Black Lives Matter LA organizers. So, at least BLM LA is really a big force here in Los Angeles. And so I did see a lot of Christian leaders, Muslim leaders, really partner with them and I guess raise the issue that, being Christian also means standing for Black Lives Matter. And so, one quote that I remember from Molina the leader of one of the leaders of Black Lives Matter LA, is that she kind of took leaders to task. She took faith leaders to task and telling them, if you can't be Christian and bow down to white supremacy. And so I did see big, presence of faith leaders out here. And I saw Latino churches who have kind of older members, specifically Latino Protestant churches. One that stands out is, they have they do have older members in their church, and, they made it they wanted to focus on Black Lives Matter to their mostly immigrant Latino membership. So it really had it really involved a lot of educating, a lot of relating their immigrant plight to the plight of others, to the plight of Black Americans here. So I did see, a lot of Latino churches kind of start taking that role of educating their Latino memberships on the importance of standing with Black Lives Matter.
Sarah, how about you? You've talked already a little bit about COVID and how that might have affected voters. Also, could you tell us a little bit about how you think issues of racial injustice affected voters of faith, whether that brought people out, whether it brought young people out in particular?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting at these protests to see definitely active voter registrations happening, like not just Black Lives Matter, but like here's a pen and how to get the vote out. Get the vote out. I just saw like was everywhere. Every every activist that I follow was, that was like such a big part of it this year. I do think with COVID that so when President Obama was running, it was sort of like social media was just becoming such a thing, and technology was so like new and innovative and interesting. This year, though, like we're like zoomed out. Like, thank you for joining us, but we're like tired of our desk, of our screens. And so, to that end, I think it was tough for Biden to shun the live rallies that Trump did. I think the live rallies that Trump decided to continue despite COVID was effective for some people. They saw that as a sign of strength, and so. So to that end, I wonder if technology was a disadvantage. I just watched the Netflix documentary about the 2008 campaigns that several women did, including Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, so AOC for short. And just looking at like the grassroots campaigning that she did and how she talks about like being a candidate. And she also did an interview with the New York Times recently. I listened to it on the Daily podcast, and she like ripped into another politician who didn't use Facebook for ad campaigning and things like that. And I think, and there's this whole like there are a million articles out there about the tensions within the Democratic Party. How do we move forward? How do we get this kind of support? We have the racial unrest. How do we turn that into votes? And I feel like there's this tension between between like the AOCs in the party and how like Biden will somehow like unify all of this. So I think it'll take a couple months to see how that plays out after his inauguration.
Thanks. That's great. Tim, let me just let you wrap up this section, and then we're going to go to questions. We've got a ton of great questions coming in. And you've talked about race, you've talked about COVID. I'd love your reaction to what others have said here. But I'd also like to just give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about what you wrote about in your book. And specifically, I'd love to hear how important you think ideas of community and serving those in need are for voters, for the groups of voters we're talking about right now. And in particular, Catholic social teachings on these issues. Do they have the potential to bring people together?
Well, I was down at the protests in the days after George Floyd was killed down at the White House. And what struck me was how it did remind me of a religious gathering. It was a community gathering. I always say, humans are a political animal. We're supposed to shape the world around us. We're supposed to get involved with other people. And at a time when we were not, our parishes were closed, obviously, for a couple more weeks after that. And I was just thinking, this is the first time I've been together with people. And it's sometimes said in a derogatory tone, but there was a religious, spiritual element to a lot of the Black Lives Matter stuff. And the reason it's sometimes said by conservatives in a derogatory tone is because this is a younger generation. And this is more, I think, in DC, I'm more seeing this among African Americans and Latinos, but a younger generation that is sort of actively shunning religion and then turning to something else to fill the gap. Now, we could make it a positive thing or a negative thing, but I did think there was that element. And so my book, Alienated America, was about that idea that we're becoming simultaneously over-centralized and hyper-individualistic in a way that so many people don't have something to belong to. And on the left, the Bernie Sanders movement, the Occupy Wall Street movement, where I camped out, and I found most people didn't care about sort of Wall Street regulation, but they cared about their lack of political power. But lack of political power is largely a lack of belonging. And that some of what was going on at the Black Lives Matter protests that I attended was exactly that, seeking the ability to shape the world around you and not feel powerless. And so a big part of what gave us Trump was the fact that a large part of the white population didn't feel connected. And the most telling stat, and I said it last time I was with you guys at Georgetown, was that the more often a white evangelical went to church, the less likely they were to support Trump, particularly in the primaries. In the general election, it was different. But also, I could go on about the 2020 election, but that would veer off into white evangelicals. But I'll definitely say that people in our alienated, isolated, hyper-individualistic world where our attention is massively centralized are looking for meaning in a world that seems to be trying to strip away any sort of meaning. And that where I saw room for sort of common bond between me, a conservative white Catholic, and these Black Lives Matter protests was looking at the deep dignity of the human individual. And it was when the more we learned about George Floyd, that there was drugs in his system, that he was involved in petty crime, the more I thought, wait a second, this is exactly who Jesus said, we need to see this person's life as infinitely valuable. And so it takes an almost religious perspective to say that, to say, it doesn't matter. He doesn't need to be some model citizen for his death to be a travesty. And I thought there was clearly room for a Christian message at that moment.
That's a great way for us to get to the questions that are coming in from people who are watching. And Jeanné, I'm going to go to you first with that. And Tim just talked about the lack of a sense of belonging. He said people are seeking the ability to shape the world around them, right? I'm wondering what you take from that, from your experience campaigning. Did you see that among younger voters? Did you see that among those people you reached? And also someone is asking, one of our viewers is asking, how did young voters respond to you as a young candidate versus older voters versus how did people of color respond? Did you have different responses from different groups of people? And in that, maybe you could weave in something about what Tim is talking about regarding these issues of Catholic social teaching that can unify us.
Yeah, I agree with Tim that people have a deep desire for belonging. And, I heard people talk about it and I felt it too, because my parish has been online since March. And I've been able to go to the church building because I sing in the choir. And so they'll have one or two choir members come and we're on our rotation. And the feeling of being able to go to the building and see other human beings is really transformative. You don't know how much you missed it until you're there. I was also at the protest in DC shortly after George Floyd was murdered. But I think what's significant to note, and I think maybe Alejandra was referencing this, is that there are many religious groups, or maybe it was Sarah, but there are many religious groups who supported Black Lives Matter protests and also held their own institutionally religious vigils. So something I often participated in, there was a weekly moment of prayer where the churches along 16th Street, which is a major thoroughfare in DC, would ring their bells for the amount of time that the officer knelt on George Floyd's neck, and everyone would kneel. And I remember going and kneeling on the concrete for over 8 minutes and thinking how painful it was for me to kneel on concrete for that amount of time, and just imagining what it means to kneel on someone, a human being, and take their life for that amount of time. And it was a deeply unifying moment, a compassionate moment, an empathetic moment that many, many people participated in. And there were vigils and experiences like that all over the country for various things that I think helped unify people and help people express the pain and anger and compassion that we were feeling. But I do think that this sense of belonging is really, really important. And I think that young people are very discerning. And I use that word very intentionally. I think young people are discerning about the flaws that are in our institutions. And to the extent that our religious institutions and other institutions cannot admit and take ownership and make efforts to correct the flaws and the mistakes that have been made, I think that young people will want to create something new. And that's what we see when we hear about like Black joy. That's what we see, when people are creating new rituals. I agree with Tim, it's a very human experience, but people no longer have patience. Young people no longer have patience for institutions who can't admit that they have made mistakes or that they are making mistakes.
Thanks for that. And Sarah, maybe I'll throw that over to you now, because what I'm seeing in the questions are young people who are frustrated with our political party. So for instance, we have one person, Louis Arsenault, who's asking, why do you say Democrats are opposed to religious liberty when religious liberty needs to go both ways, right? When the Republican Party has in many ways stood against the religious liberty of groups, Muslims and others. And then we have Mar Munoz-Vizoso, who is a behind-the-scenes leader in the Catholic Church, who says, Sarah makes a good point. Pro-life Democrats feel like they're homeless. The Democratic Party needs to understand that we're here and that there should be room for us. So political parties don't seem to be homes for people. What is does that resonate with you? What's your reaction to that and to what others have said here so far?
You made this point earlier, but you said that for Catholics, it seems like there's no political home. I definitely saw that in the data that I referred to earlier from Ryan Burge. He sent me this graph that's all Catholics, so regardless of race, and it's split for approval for Trump. It's split like almost half and half in every age category, whether they approve or disapprove of him. So almost straight down the middle. You have people who like him and don't like him. The category where we do see a bit of a difference is among 18 to 35-year-olds. So Gen Z and younger millennials. They have a lesser approval rating of President Trump, and we could talk about, theories as to why. For that. But I do think that's interesting in terms of like not feeling like you have a political home. I think a lot of people that I talk to would be independent. Again, to Jeanné's point, like if you didn't feel like you had to be part of a political party so you could vote in a primary. I know that's true for people, my friends here in New York City. I know that's true for people in DC and a lot of other places. And then in terms of religious liberty, I would say that in the 1990s, the religious freedom as an idea or as an issue was very bipartisan. You can see the votes for the act called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, shortened to RFRA, was like super, super high support from both parties. President Clinton signed it into law, and for various reasons, it's gotten caught up into LGBT rights in the last couple of years, especially since, gay marriage has become the law of the land. And there have been so many different cases like the baker, the wedding photographer, these kinds of cases have come up where you have different rights kind of put up against each other. And so, do we value sort of anti-discrimination laws, or do we value these religious freedom laws? And each state has kind of worked that out to their end. But we're seeing like the Supreme Court is right now considering a case along those lines about that, go up against these religious rights and gay rights. So I think that has yet to be work itself out. I think, in theory, conservative religious people love religious freedom unless a mosque is being built around the corner from them. We see that time and time again. They oppose that kind of religious freedom. And then, but when it comes to can my church reopen in light of COVID, that's when they want religious liberty. And then for liberals, it's it sort of changes depending on what religious freedom are you talking about. So I think it used to be a little more bipartisan, and it's gotten caught up and gotten more complicated in the last few years.
Certainly has, and that's for sure. Alejandra, I'd love to go to you with this next question that we're having. And first, I wonder if you might talk a little bit, maybe react to, if you'd like, Tim's comments on the search for community and the sense of belonging. Are people really, do their votes, do Latinos votes track that search for community, desire for a sense of belonging? But also we have someone who's asking, at this time of intense division, could Latinos and young people be bridge builders, get us beyond anger, polarization, and paralysis? Are they as bitterly divided as older voters or other groups of voters? What are your thoughts on any one of these issues?
One thing that I found that I've just noticed among young Latino Catholics is that, especially during the demonstrations around Black Lives Matter, is that there was this, they were really seeking their church community to make space for to make space for Black Lives Matter discussions, and not just in terms of saying racial reconciliation. They just wanted their pastors, their leaderships to acknowledge and say Black Lives Matter. And so I know that some tried to, I mean, I know of one person that I didn't interview her, but she just expressed to me what she had gone through in her own church space, is that, you know, she was really energized by the protests and she wanted her church space to acknowledge that. And she didn't know who to go to. She didn't know how to bring up these tough discussions. And, you know, it's just, I guess they're just trying to navigate, how do I bring these issues up to the leadership in my own church? And so I don't know if they're coming at this as a bitter, like the bitter tone or anything. They just want more inclusivity. They want their voices to be heard in their church spaces. And, you know, I did tune into one service from a Jesuit Catholic parish in East LA. They cater to Latino immigrant families. And in one of the services, they held up a poster that said, "Órale, Black Lives Matter." So that's kind of Spanglish to say, like, yeah, Black Lives Matter. And so, you know, they held up these posters and they made space for that. And given that it's such a immigrant parish, there's young people around the community as well. You know, I thought that was a big step, I think, for a Catholic parish for their pastors to use that language and to kind of start trying to educate and start up a conversation among their parishioners. So I don't think they're coming at this in a bitter tone, but they just want to have a discussion. And so yeah, that's kind of what I've noticed among young Latino Catholic voters, that for them, it kind of just wasn't enough for their pastors, for their bishop to say language like racial reconciliation. They wanted specific, you know, language. They wanted them to say Black Lives Matter. And so yeah, so that's what I've noticed among young Latino Catholic voters in terms of those social justice movements.
Thanks for that. And Tim, I might maybe draw on that. I know you've written very evocatively about your parish and how involved your family is in your parish in Silver Spring. I wonder if you might talk a little bit about that, right? In other words, how, if you look around at your parish, how do you see people bringing these major issues there? And also, we have a question, somebody coming in saying, what's the effect of the fact that President Trump is still contesting the election on kind of the future of the Republican Party with young voters, with other voters that the party is trying to draw in? So two very different questions, but I'd love you to take one or both.
I'll try to be as quick as possible. So a lot of people, if you're in church on Sunday, you know, or whether you're Hispanic, Black, white, everybody else looks like you. That's the sad story about America. It's more so for Protestants, but it's also true for Catholics. My parish is different, and it was a sort of a sad accident that made a happy accident flow out of it. Two nearby parishes closed their schools, and one of them was mostly Black. The other was almost entirely Hispanic. The most involved parents in those parishes came and flocked to us. We had this great pastor, Father Dan Leary. He's now down in Mexico, actually. But but he built up our school. We're incredibly diverse. My wife and I, lots of parents learn about countries that they didn't know exist by meeting other families. Eritrea wasn't a country when we were kids. I'm Gen X. And so I met my first Eritreans there. Every country in the world is represented in our parish. And it's amazing. And it gives our kids this perspective on the world. And specifically when it's infused with Christian teaching, my children, we talk to them from the beginning about George Floyd, about Black Lives Matter. There are multiple cops. Most of them are non-white in our parish. And there are lots of, it's probably about 15% African American and 20% African immigrant in our parish too. So they see the complexities. And again, Christian teaching gives it the resonance that I think makes it possible to talk about it in a way that involves love and not just political squabbling. Speaking of political squabbling, your second question there, I think the reason that young voters disproportionately flocked away from the Republican Party this year, more so than even in past years, is Donald Trump's comportment, his lack of concern for being honest, being respectful. Jeanné was talking about this, accountability, etc. All of that is particularly a turnoff to younger voters who, you're learning your manners, you're learning how to talk, you're learning how to debate in college. And here's a guy who just doesn't care about it. And so this show that he's putting on, pretending that he won, I think will have lasting harm for Republicans among young voters specifically.
Thanks, Tim. You and I both share the fact that we find a real sense of belonging and a sense of community and home at our parish. Jeanné, I know that you are at a terrific parish in Washington, D.C. as well, and find a sense of belonging and community there. And we have a question coming in that kind of dovetails right with that. Someone asked they say Washington, D.C. is blessed by a vibrant Black Catholic community. So what does it mean to have an African-American cardinal who speaks out for immigrants and Black lives, unborn children, care for creation?
Archbishop Gregory visited St. Augustine Parish very early on in his appointment, and folks were very, very excited. I'm very excited. I've had the privilege of meeting him as well. And I think that his appointment and his voice have elevated the divisions, unfortunately, in our church nationwide, because he's received a lot of backlash for some of the things that he said, specifically speaking out against racial injustice. But I also think it's important, his appointment is important to evangelize the Roman Catholic Church. And by that, what I mean is when I speak to African Americans who are not Catholic, some of whom who are previously Catholic, some who've never been Catholic or have misconceptions about the Catholic Church, they're very excited about his appointment. They know who he is. They know that he's been appointed. They know that Pope Francis appointed him. They know that he's being elevated to cardinal, and they're paying closer attention. And they're actually very surprised that there is a leader that high up in the Catholic Church, in the U.S. Catholic Church, who is speaking, very robustly and courageously about these issues, and who has the sanction of the Vatican. So I think his appointment certainly is significant for African-American Catholics, but I actually think it's more important and more significant for educating the rest of the country about the fullness of the Roman Catholic Church in the United States. And from a religious and spiritual perspective, I think it's deeply critical for evangelizing the mystery and the opportunity within the Roman Catholic Church.
Thanks so much. And this has been such a great conversation. We're coming to the end of our time together. So I'd love to just go around the group here with ask for a brief answer to an important question. And it's this: what's one action that our viewers can take in response to what they've heard during this discussion? How can young people, how can young Latino leaders help bring the country together, strengthen democracy, advance the common good in a specific way? And let's start with you, Alejandra, if that's all right.
I guess to just be open to having tough conversations and not to be turned off by the energy of young Latinos, young Latino faith leaders. So I guess just to listen and to be open to having frank discussions with them.
Thank you. How about you, Sarah?
I would say that it always starts with education, like self-educating. I think, we've had a lot this year, right? We've had a lot of conversations about health, racial justice, our political process system. So I think, getting book recommendations, if you're staying at home, like you have maybe more time on your hands. So I've been reading a lot more this year. I just read a book called iGen that was really helpful for me, understanding like the iGen, the younger generation under millennials. So, but yeah, I think education is sort of a first step, and then you can, figure out how like advocacy goes from there.
That's great. Thanks. How about you, Tim? What's one action our viewers can take in response to this conversation?
Volunteer on the local level. Serve people around you, particularly people who are different, and when possible, COVID willing, in person. Pope Francis used to like to say, the shepherd ought to smell like the sheep. I think that this is not just for the shepherds, but for all of us. That Jesus commands us very explicitly to love our neighbor, and that we need to do that in person whenever possible. And that means you can't love all 7 billion of your neighbors equally, constantly, all the time. You're going to have to love the ones you're physically proximate to, again, COVID willing, with labor, volunteering, and sacrificial love. And that will A, change the world, but B, change the way you see it.
Amen to that. And that resonates very much, Jeanné, with I think what your campaign was all about, right? Getting locally involved. What would you say to people watching tonight about one action they can take in response to what they've heard?
Yeah, I agree with Tim, and I would encourage folks to look in, especially younger people, to look into your local mutual aid network, which is not exactly charity, but it's more about self-determination, and it's about reciprocity. And especially for folks who might feel disenchanted with institutions, it's an opportunity to connect one-on-one with your neighbors and think about how all of us have something to offer, even if someone might appear to be extremely poor or disabled or in need of other things. I also, as a former candidate, would be remiss if I didn't say, pick one politician that you like, even if they're not perfect. So often we focus on the politicians that we don't like. I would look at your local level and pick one politician that you like and sign up for their newsletter, listen to what they have to say, introduce yourself to them in some way on social media and get involved, because building that relationship with your local politicians helps build accountability, and also you get better informed about how to make your community better.
That is a great way to end it, and it really gives me hope. And thank you all for this wonderful conversation that we've had here tonight. Thanks to all of you watching for joining us for this virtual Latino Leaders and Salt Lake Gathering. And just a reminder that this discussion will be recorded and posted on our website and social channels for later viewing as well. We also have some great follow-up resources posted at our site there too. I want to let you know about a great dialogue we have on deck next week. On Thursday, December 10th, in partnership with Fordham University's Taking Responsibility Initiative, we'll hold an online public dialogue on the McCarrick Report, Findings, Lessons, Directions. 1 month after this groundbreaking and long-awaited report was released, this dialogue will look at its most important findings, the lessons it holds, and future directions for Catholics as we continue to confront the clergy abuse crisis in our church. More information on how to join this upcoming dialogue can be found on our website. And in case you haven't yet had your fill of Giving Tuesday appeals, while you're there, please know that we could always use your support. Thanks as always to my colleagues, John Carr and Anna Misla, for everything they did to help bring this together. We're especially grateful to everyone who helped us on the technical end of things, including our partners at the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs and Optimum Audio. And finally, thanks to our participants, Sarah Pulliam Bailey, Tim Carney, Jeanné Lewis, and Alejandra Molina for their outstanding contributions to this discussion. I hope you all have a good night and that you're able to join us again soon.